Welcome to the Monday, September 9th edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Hope everyone had a wonderful weekend. If you're a Clemson fan and you didn't have a wonderful weekend, you might have a problem. Amazing showing by Brent Venables and his defense. Yet another masterpiece for the master. Did not see 10 points coming. And 10 points, of course, is quite generous. We got plenty of analysis and insight on sort of what made that happen, how that came together, that game plan, those funky looks with the three safeties and all that. Blitzes galore. Would love to know where that ranks on the list of most blitzes per game by old BV. Also, some insight on TigerIllustrated.com right now on Trevor Lawrence. As a sophomore, he don't take no crap. I think that's pretty clear about what we've seen so far. Also, of course, Paul Strelo's highly anticipated and chock full of information Monday Recruiting Insider. Great stuff there. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Parham Smith Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. They have been with us from the very beginning. Blake Smith has been a good friend of mine for years, dating back to the days when he taught a law class at Clemson with Terry Don Phillips. Also, Brooke Archenhold, major Clemson fans. The forte of their firm, which is at 15 Washington Park in Greenville, is medical negligence. They represent patients and their families in medical negligence actions. Also handle all sorts of other personal injury litigation. Free consultations, Parham Smith and Archenhold. Give them a call, 864-990-4581, or go to parhamlaw.com. Want to welcome aboard to the podcast Blackacre Law Firm, sister law firm of Parham Smith and Archenhold in Greenville. Stuart James is a 1998 Clemson grad, big Clemson fan, just like the Parham Smith and Archenhold family. Blackacre gives you the representation you can depend on when you're on the home stretch, closing on your house. All those documents you're signing, all those technical aspects of it. The last thing you want is for something to go wrong at that point. Blackacre also provides services for wills, powers of attorney, durable, and healthcare. Don't put yourself and your family in a bad situation by not having these important documents. Call today for a consultation, 864-775-5400, or go to their website, blackacrelawfirm.com. That's BLACKACRE lawfirm.com. Okay, in the house at Death Valley on Saturday, Andrea Adelson of ESPN.com and Ralph Russo, national college football writer for the Associated Press. Always enjoy visiting with them, and felt like it'd be a good time to check in and see what their impressions were from watching that beatdown on Saturday afternoon. So we'll start with Mrs. Adelson and then transition to Mr. Russo afterward. Enjoy. All right. Andrea Adelson, ESPN.com. Really a longtime admirer of your work, and really glad you could join us.
Well, I am honored that you asked me, especially because I know David Hale usually gets the number one line for us on the Clemson coverage. So I'm glad I could get a little love here, too.
Of course. Yeah, Dave he's a piece of work, and really always enjoy his presence. He's here a lot more often, I guess, because he lives in Charlotte, but he's one of a kind for sure, and enjoy y'all's banter back and forth on Twitter as well. So you were at Clemson over the weekend, and I'm just curious what your impressions were, or I guess feelings were going into the A&M game, which a lot of people build as a huge showdown, and what maybe you were surprised by, not so surprised by.
Well, it's interesting. My brother-in-law, you might call him a degenerate gambler, bets on tons of games every weekend. And he happened to be in town last week before I was headed up to the game. And he told me, look, that line on the A&M Clemson game at 16.5 right now, there is no way I am touching that line. I don't know if Clemson's going to cover. I don't know what is going to happen because of the game last year. I am staying far, far away from that game. And I said to him, I'm like, I kind of agree with you. Because of what we saw last year in this game, because of the way Jimbo and Dabo know each other, I thought this might be a relatively close, good game. And boy, was I wrong for 3 quarters plus 14 minutes and however many seconds. Clemson should have won by a lot more than that. There were plays that were left out there on the field. But before we get into that, my overall impressions of the game were, number one, defense. The way Kellen Mond played in this game last year, I knew that the Clemson defensive players were going to feel like they had something to prove, especially the defensive backs. They talked about it all week. And it was clear that Jimbo was going to go with that game plan again, the way they started the game, 2 straight passes. He wanted to put the ball in Kellen Mond's hands because he felt good about having his quarterback be the one to lead him to the victory. But from the very outset of the game, Kellen Mond was completely off of his game, and I think that just gave the Clemson defense more and more confidence to know that they had gotten to him, they had rattled him, and then that defense really started to take over the game. We're talking about a defense, you've covered this, you know this as well as anybody, that lost 5 players to the NFL draft, all the guys on the defensive line. That was the big storyline going into the game. And where is the drop-off? They held Texas A&M to under 100 yards rushing, and this once again is another dominant defensive performance for Clemson, barring that last-second touchdown that Jimbo's calling timeouts to get. On the offensive side of the ball, the balance that this team has, being able to run the ball when the passing game is maybe not what you expect it to be, or pass the ball when the running game maybe is not what you expect it to be, is what sets Clemson apart from everybody in the ACC and just about everybody in the country. And it's really not just the ability that they have to run and throw. It's the game changers that they have at all of those positions. The receivers are absolutely incredible, the way they contort themselves to make these amazing catches. Travis Etienne maybe didn't have the burst of a game that he had the week before, but Lynn J. Dixon comes in and he makes some big plays. Trevor Lawrence, some of the touchdowns he made, you can see why he's going to be making a lot of money on Sundays in the NFL. So once again, this team looks like they're going to be able to run through ACC play without much of a problem because of the way that it's set up. And as Dabo told us all, we're only scratching the surface. We're only in week 2. There are plays that we left out there that we know we can be better at, both on offense and defense. So it'll be fun to watch this team develop as the season goes on, and maybe we can start comparing whether this team at the end of the year is maybe even going to be better than what we saw last year. I don't know if that is going to end up being the case, but the pieces are in there. They're there. I think already we've seen in the first 2 weeks that maybe this team can top what last year's team did.
Yeah, the pieces are certainly in the brain of Brent Venables, because I tell you, I mean, he's had a lot of masterpieces over his career, but that one has to rank near the top, just given all the funky, different stuff he was throwing. I really think Mond, more than, I mean, he was off his game, obviously, but I think he was spooked by what he saw, because he had no idea they were going to move Isaiah Simmons from Sam linebacker to center field safety as part of a 3-safety look. He had no idea they were going to move Kayvon Wallace up sort of to the second level slot guy role. And so it's almost like, Brent, you give him a whole off season to prepare, especially coming off of or with the memory of last year of what Mond and those receivers did to them in College Station, and the line, the spread going into the game suddenly makes a lot more sense. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, no question about that. And this is something that Dabo said in his press conference after the game, that it was a lot easier to game plan this year because they had the full season of A&M under Jimbo Fisher, plus the game that they played against them last year, than it was to game plan for them a year ago, because they're trying to look up old Florida State film, they're looking up old Texas A&M film just to get a gauge for what players they were going to be squaring off against. So I agree with you, and I tweeted this after the game. You know, Brent Venables, once again, and it kind of sounds like a broken record, but it bears repeating over and over again, proves why he is the best defensive coordinator in the country, not just because he had all this time to make a game plan, but because of the genius of the game plan and the way that he was able to use a lot of his players in different ways, in unexpected ways. And I agree with you. I thought Kellen was spooked as well, because it wasn't just that he was missing guys. I mean, he was airmailing balls. He wasn't even coming close, especially in that first half. Second half, there were a bunch of drops that those receivers had. And there were some plays that were available for them to make. They just didn't make any of them, whereas last year they made almost all of them. And so that's where the genius of Brent Venables really comes into play. People doubting your defense, people wondering if you're going to have what it takes, people thinking back to last year's performance, and you use all of that to fuel you going into the week, plus all the game tape that you had, and that's the performance that we saw last week. And that leads to the question of this week, when you talk about Syracuse and now having an entire year to game plan for that game, sitting with the thoughts and emotions of the game a year ago. Before Syracuse lost to Maryland, I thought to myself, boy, Clemson is just going to truck this team. And now I feel like that more than ever.
Yeah, some of those with Syracuse, I mean, you kind of knew the offense after losing Eric Dungy. They were going to sort of have to take a little bit of time to find themselves and rebuild. I mean, I think even Dino Babers has said that, but he's also said they were going to have to lean on their defense and supposedly a really good defensive line. But my goodness, Maryland punted 3 times, I think 11 of 15 on third downs. And the craziest stat to me, one of the craziest stats of the year so far overall, 8 red zone trips, 8 touchdowns. What in the world? Like, normally coaches, aspire to like 70 or 75% touchdown percentage in the red zone, but 8 for 8.
And they did it with a quarterback who may not have even won the starting job at Virginia Tech, who was basically on the outs there. And that's one of the big reasons why he decided to leave. So you're talking about a player who could never quite put it together in the ACC now, who is absolutely torching the Syracuse defense. And you mentioned that defensive line with Alton Robinson and Kendall Coleman. The talk at Media Day in Charlotte was, well, are you the best defensive end duo in the ACC going into this year? Because we knew Clemson was rebuilding and some other teams lost some really good defensive ends. To go from that to the type of performance that we saw last weekend is head-scratching, because you're absolutely right. A lot of people thought that this defense had turned the corner. And, oh, by the way, they had a freshman All-American in the secondary, and Andre Cisco, coming back. They felt like they had developed their linebackers and their secondary to a point where they wouldn't be giving up 63 points a game the way that they were in Dino Babers' first year. And that was a horrendous defense that they had in year one, where they were getting into shootouts with teams and or getting blown out because they couldn't stop anybody. I was having flashbacks to that. And here I thought, all right, these guys are improved. And clearly there were some issues there. I talked to some folks at Syracuse, and they just felt like the guys were looking ahead to Clemson. And I don't know if that's really much of an excuse, but they kind of felt like it was almost an afterthought, that game. And that's what happens when you treat a Power 5 team as an afterthought. You're not going to be competitive at all.
You've covered the ACC for quite some time, and you can remember, of course, when the big knock on the conference was, I guess back in 2010, 11, around there, 12 was when, hey, they keep losing these big stage games and they don't have the national profile, the teams, any teams elevating, to that top 5 level, contending for national titles. Then Florida State rises up and does it. Then Clemson joins them. What do you make right now of, even though Clemson has won 2 of the last 3 national titles, I'm looking at you guys' power rankings right now, and Florida State is 14th in the ACC. I'm not arguing. Just crazy stuff. Syracuse, widely considered to be the second best team in the ACC, just falls on its faces at Maryland. What is the, I guess, damage, or what does it mean when, you got Clemson that the ACC can hitch its wagon to on the ACC network and all that, but no one else right now?
It's a great question, and it's one that I've debated and argued with a lot of people, because Clemson has been so tied up with the state of the ACC that people cannot get outside that box. And we heard that revisionist history throughout the offseason coming from the SEC. Oh, well, they didn't play anybody, so they were fresher in the championship game. It's all BS, if you ask me, if I'm allowed to use those initials on this podcast. And if that championship game last year was not proof that Clemson should be viewed as Clemson and not Clemson of the ACC, I'm not really sure what else starts changing people's minds beyond, okay, here we go again. Let's talk about the tradition-rich programs in the ACC needing to step up. So much of the ACC's perception is based on Florida State and Miami and what they are doing, independent of Clemson, because those have been the teams that people expect to be competing for championships. Florida State at number 14 in the power rankings is something I never, ever in my life thought that I would do, but they absolutely deserve it for the way that they played these first 2 weeks. And Miami is now 0-2 for the first time since 1978. So, yeah, Syracuse fell on its face. Clemson is amazing, but people are looking at what Florida State and Miami, and to some extent, what Virginia Tech are doing when they start to form their opinions of the ACC. My counter-argument to that is, would you rather be the Pac-12, where you just don't have any championship contenders? No, you'd rather have a team that you can count on to get your conference into the college football playoff. And in talking to ACC coaches about this, the one thing they bring up and they talk about that I think people don't realize is this is good for the ACC as a whole. You have coaches who can go to the athletic directors and say, you want us to be more competitive against Clemson? Okay, well, why don't we upgrade our facilities? Why don't we start paying our assistant coaches better so that we can all collectively raise up our level to meet what Clemson is doing? And we've seen more of that commitment, I think, on the football level the last couple of years. But there needs to be more than just Clemson, I think, for the entire league to build on and change the perception of what it is. I don't think that should preclude people, though, from considering Clemson as an elite team, because they are. And it doesn't matter who they play. Look at what they did in the game against Texas A&M. That's an SEC team the last time I checked. And Dabo's record since 2012, I think, against the SEC is 15-4. And that's and those are wins against 6 different SEC teams. So I just wish that there were separate conversations about the state of the league and whether that is a direct reflection on Clemson and its ability to make the playoff.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to say, Clemson traditionally it has an easier road in the ACC than if it were in the SEC. I mean, typically, underscore typically, because we do have exceptions when some years the SEC stinks too. It's easier, but you can say that without saying, oh gosh, Clemson got to rest up all last. I mean, that's just utterly, like you said, BS. Number one, because, there's these things called 5 weeks between the regular season and the playoff. I mean, you would think that Alabama has enough time to rest up for then. But I just wonder, in the run-up to the opener against Georgia Tech, when, of course, the ACC with its network is making Clemson the centerpiece, you wonder, just hypothetically imagine, and it's hard to imagine, if last year Clemson had a rebuilding year or something and they were 8-4, what would the ACC have been doing for the past several weeks as trying to pump up its network, the advent of its network?
It's a great question, one that we will never have the answer to. But look, there's no doubt that the rest of the league needs to step up its game. And I hope we're going to get to that point in the next couple of years. I cannot believe we've been having this conversation because, in 2016, it looked like this league was the best one in the country. They had an unbelievable record in the bowls. Clemson won a national championship. Mark Richt was at Miami. Everything was looking up there. Jimbo Fisher looked like he was going to be competitive with Clemson. And then everything just kind of started to fall apart. And the ACC needed a team to be carrying that flag for the network. And I asked John Swafford when we were in Charlotte for Media Day, you've got Clemson, but does the network need Florida State and Miami to be good in order to really help the network out? And he wouldn't exactly answer the question. He's being very diplomatic about it, but he also said that we need other teams to join Clemson. And so when you've got the second best team in the ACC in Syracuse getting absolutely hosed, and then you have Florida State almost losing to ULM, which they probably should have, and then you have Miami starting 0-2. No matter what North Carolina is doing, it's a great feel-good story. Nobody's considering North Carolina and now Virginia in the top 25 is adding to the overall health of the ACC. I truly believe that the perception of this league wholly is determined, or mostly is determined, on who else is up there with Clemson among the teams that have won championships. And that's why this league, I really do believe, needs Florida State and Miami to get things turned around, because I don't know how much longer it can be Clemson and everybody else for people to continue to care about what the conference as a whole is offering up.
I guess you started at ESPN in 2010, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the ACC the whole time, right?
I started covering the ACC my second year, and my first year was Big East / I guess they're the group of 5 teams now, which has actually benefited me because now I get to write about Syracuse and Pitt and Louisville, and those were the teams that I started writing about when I first started at ESPN.
So you've been covering Dabo for quite a while. Just from the perspective of somebody who's not around Clemson, just can you maybe give your perspective on what you make of this guy and just how different he is from really anybody else out there?
He's different, and everybody who asks me who is not involved in what we do, whether it's family or friends who are super interested in my job and who I get to talk to and are kind of starstruck when I say which games that I went to, they always ask, is Dabo really like that, or is that just what we see on TV? And I have to tell them, oh, yeah, he's really like that, because nobody really truly believes that a football coach can be that way, right? This idea of the football coach being the guy who is has a snarl on his face and is cussing at players and yelling at guys, and there's no fun because we're always working, and the Saban kind of archetype, but it goes well before him, going back to the days of the Junction Boys and Bear Bryant and the way these guys led their programs, Woody Hayes. Dabo is so unique in that way that I still think people believe, well, it's just too good to be true. That's really not who he is, when in fact, that's exactly who he is. Last week, I'll just give you the perfect example. I got lost coming out of the second floor, and I didn't know which way I was supposed to go out so I could get back to the press box. And I ran into Dabo in the hallway. And instead of yelling, what are you doing in here? You're not supposed to be in here, which some other coaches most likely would do. He's like, oh, hey, Andrea, it's so good to see you. You driving home tonight? Where are you going off to? And so we just got into a conversation about staying at the Marriott at the Atlanta airport and how convenient it is when you guys take an early flight out from Atlanta. I don't have those conversations with any other head coaches, and that's just because of who Dabo is. He's interested in learning about people. He's interested in making those human connections, and it's more than just the X's and O's with him. Does he want to win? Is he super highly competitive? Is he detailed? Is he organized? Is he driven? Heck yeah. But he's also somebody who cares about developing relationships with people, whether you're the janitor or the reporter like me or the grandmothers of the players on his team or his players or his coaches or anybody across town. I was talking to his brother, Tracy, who tries to help him out by leading him out places and guarding people from getting too many autographs because he's got places to go. And Dabo always stops. And Tracy's always like, but no, like, Dabo, we really have to get going. And Dabo's like, no, I just signed this one. But it's never just this one, right? So yeah, based on my experience, he's completely different. And it's so refreshing. And I have to tell you, there's a couple coaches now in the ACC who have explicitly said, I want to do things the Dabo way. You know, Scott Satterfield has told me that from his visits when he was at App State coming to visit Clemson. Mac Brown has said that. You know, we're talking about a championship-winning coach. So it doesn't have to be all like angry, cussing, don't come to see me in my office because I don't care about you beyond you being a player. You can do what Dabo is and be completely genuine in who you are, true to your beliefs, and also be a highly successful football coach.
I often watch other head coaches' press conferences on YouTube. I don't really know why. I guess I'm just interested in what they're saying and the whole media thing. But I mean, most of these coaches' post-game press conferences or midweek or early week formal press conferences are like 10 to 15 minutes. And Dabo, I mean, his opening statement is about 10 to 15 minutes sometimes. And you were sitting there after the game Saturday. I don't know how long that was, probably about 20 minutes, but he would have stood there for another 25 minutes if people had more questions. I mean, you just get the feeling, and not that he's doing it just to, I don't know, sell the program or whatever. It just seems like that's who he really is, I guess is what I'm saying.
No question. There is no other coach that I remember covering who would talk to you as long as you wanted without looking at a watch or speeding it up, or even like 10 minutes in, their PR person comes in and says, last question. Most of the time, that's how it goes. After 10 minutes, you're done. And I covered Georgia Vanderbilt game a couple weeks ago, and then Notre Dame Louisville. And being in Kirby Smart's press conference for Georgia and Brian Kelly's press conference for Notre Dame, okay, yes, they were road teams, but after about 8 minutes, that was it. You know, they were done. They wanted to get out of there. And it was, okay, last question. Even when Dabo's on the road, there isn't this like, okay, 8 minutes in, that last question. We usually have to wait a while for him to come out. But it's usually worth it in the end because he'll answer everything that you want to have answered. And even if there's something that you want to ask him that you don't really want to ask in front of the group of 50 reporters, he'll give you that time to decide if you have something absolutely important that maybe you're working on that you don't want to tip anybody off to. He'll do that for you too. And there are very few coaches, if any at all, who give you all of that time. And a lot of it is because those coaches sometimes view us as some kind of enemy. You know, where have we heard that before? I don't think Dabo views us in a negative way. I think that he truly understands and appreciates that we have a job to do. Does he get defensive sometimes if he doesn't like the line of questioning? Yeah, and my colleague David Hale has been on that end of it. I've been on that end of it, too. He was a little annoyed last year when I was asking him about Kelly Bryant.
Really?
Does he have eligibility to come back? Remember that?
I don't remember
after
that.
The Syracuse game? No, yeah. So, you know, yeah, he gets annoyed and defensive at times. He's trying to protect his football program. I totally get it. But he's never going to cut it off and storm out, you know, the way that a lot of these other coaches would. And honestly, you know, that annoyance or that anger, that defensiveness, it makes for, like, really good comments from him. You know, when he gets fired up like that, we get a window into Dabo that sometimes we wouldn't get otherwise if we were just asking the same, you know, cliched kind of question. So fired up Dabo to me is just as good as happy press conference Dabo to me.
A great friend of the Clemson Dubcast and winner of the Clemson Area Chamber of Commerce Business of the Year Award, Founders Federal Credit Union. If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers, and all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership, as well as IPTAY members. Matt Gross is a proud Clemson alum and the vice president for the Clemson market for Founders Federal Credit Union. Membership at Founders has many benefits: great rates on loans and savings products, advice on investments and insurance products, and even a Clemson debit card available for any Founders member with a checking account. Founders Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the NCUA. If you're in Clemson, stop by and see Matt and his staff, 680 Old Greenville Highway, Suite 300, right next to the Walmart Neighborhood Market. Big supporter of the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America. Based in Anderson, South Carolina, Harris Flooring has been instrumental in a lot of the facilities transformation you've seen on Clemson's campus lately. From the Allen Reeves Center to the McFadden Building to Memorial Stadium to the Neary Center. Family owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy. Harris Flooring is just as good inside the home and the residential realm as they are with the larger scale commercial stuff. Give them a call, 864-642-6183, or online at flooringamerica-anderson.com. All right, so just a little bit on your background. So you live in Orlando, is that right?
Yep, I do.
Okay, and you have how many kids?
I have two daughters. One is 11, just started middle school, and so far I don't have any extra gray hairs because of that, but I assume they're coming. And then I've got an 8-year-old, and she is about to start her first season playing ice hockey, of all things, here in Orlando.
Oh, wow. So I have two daughters. They're 12 and 10, and I know how hard it is to do this job when my wife is not a sports writer and I'm in the town of the team that I'm covering. So I'm fascinated to hear, your husband is a sports writer, correct?
Yes, he is.
Okay. I just want to know how, I just want you to give me a window into how in the world you've juggled all that over the however many of the past years.
Well, it's not easy, as you know, and as any working parent knows. It's never easy to juggle the demands of work life plus family life. And there's a lot of mom guilt that's involved. For example, this Thursday, I'm leaving again. I'll be at the game on Saturday, and I have to miss open house for my third grader, which I hate to do because I like to know the teachers. I like to be in school, and it's a bummer. And there's a lot of activities that I end up missing, especially around football season, between dance recitals or sports competitions that they might be doing, art shows at school, and it hurts. But, you know, I tell myself that I'm trying to be a role model for my daughters, and they can see me succeeding in a profession where there are not a lot of people who look like me. It's still a very male-dominated profession, and I feel like I'm showing to them, well, you can do anything you want, and don't let anyone tell you no. If you want to go out and be the only, female to cover a specific team or to, be an engineer at a certain company, well, then go out and do it, and don't let anybody stop you. So that's how I kind of view my job and my role when I think about, oh man, I'm going to be missing something else. They understand. They're sweet, awesome kids. They're also sports fans, and they were totally thrilled that I got to see Trevor Lawrence in person. I believe my 8-year-old, when I showed him a picture, said, "Ooh, he's cute." I'm like, join the club. So they get it, and sometimes they're a little bummed when I'm not around. But I think they understand, and they think it's fairly cool that I have a job like this. But in terms of juggling what happens on weekends, sometimes my husband's out of town himself, and neither of us are home. And we've got an amazing babysitter here who we would not be able to survive without. My parents live about 2 hours away, and they provide some help. We've got friends who we've come to lean on as well, who can take our kids to whatever activity might be going on that we cannot get to physically. And I have to say that between us and our community that we built around here, my kids have never missed anything that they've absolutely had to be at. And I am beyond grateful for all the support that we have from the community that we live in. You know, a lot of people ask me, well, why do you live in Orlando? I don't have to live here. I could really live anywhere that I wanted to. And I feel a strong kinship with the community here. And my kids are happy here, and they love it here. And it's a tight-knit group that we have, and we can lean on people when we need them. And let me tell you something, during football season, we absolutely need them.
Some recent guests on the podcast, including David Hale, Paul Meyerberg of USA Today, we've talked about the struggle of social media as far as like how much time do you spend on it? How much interacting do you feel like you have to do when you have people, you know, responding to your tweets or whatever, engaging? Do you have a philosophy, I guess a firm philosophy on that in terms of time management, or does it just kind of, you just sort of handle it as it comes?
Well, I know David Hale on social media, and there are times when I send him text messages and I'm like, David, I think you just need to step away, like go get a drink, and it'll be fine. And I don't want to get to the point where I have to step away and go get a drink to calm my nerves. So in that respect, David and I are completely different people. Because, look, when you tweet about college football, you are going to get very angry people responding to you. Even if you think it's the most innocuous tweet in the whole world, there will be name calling, there will be death threats, there will be wishing illness and ill on you, which I've all had happen to me from various fan bases, which I will not name. And it got to the point a couple of years ago where I said to myself, I really don't need to be dealing with this. I've got other stuff I need to be focusing my attention on. When the mentions start coming on, telling you should go, kill yourself. I don't need to look at that, really, on a daily basis. And so the way I've decided to kind of handle my social media profile is to try to be engaged during football season, because I think that's when most of my followers are most engaged on social media, tweeting out either my stories or stories that my colleagues do, or general feel-good stories. I try to keep it positive. If there's criticism warranted of a team, then I will give that criticism, knowing that I'm probably going to hear about it. But I try not to name call, and I try not to get down into the mud with people who are name calling me, because I really don't think that serves any greater purpose, and it starts sending you down rabbit holes that you really don't want to know exist, to be honest. So I try to be as pleasant as I possibly can if people are pleasant to me, but if you're going to sit here and start trashing me, I'm not going to respond. I don't really even feel like that's warranted or worth my time. And I really do like using social media to get the gauge of what other reporters are doing, but also what fan bases are feeling, how they're feeling, what is the pulse of what's happening in those specific communities, because I really do feel like that can inform some of the reporting, especially, let's just take Florida State as an example, and what's happened there the last couple of years. I've got good relationships with the coaches on those staffs, but I also hear from a very angry fan base right now that, wants answers and wants there to be changes made. And so that gives me an idea of the sense of what's happening in Tallahassee and why, when you turn on a game, there's only 30,000 people in the stands. I know that the fan base is angry just based on my social media feed alone, and that can help. The flip side, the same for positivity, and what's happening, with a program that is doing well. So I try to take it as trying to stay positive on it while knowing that it is a cesspool at times, and I have to know when to respond and when to just walk away from the computer.
When are you, I guess, most productive? Like, do you have a process? Like some people, it's early in the morning, and I'm sure you have to be really efficient as a mother. Do you have like a time of day when you're doing your most work?
Definitely late at night. It's always been the time when that's when I can focus best. Although it sounds counterintuitive because I'm usually up by 6:15 every morning. It's not until about 11 p.m. where things start clicking for a story. Like, oh, yeah, that's the way I should go with the story. Whether I'm like just sitting watching TV and it hits me and then I got to go to the computer to write it down, or if I'm staring at the screen since 9 o'clock and finally at 11, there's been some kind of breakthrough. That's the way it's always been for me, and I'm not sure why that is. I'm not really a morning person, to be honest, even though I get a lot of stuff done for like my kids and exercise-wise in the morning. Nighttime is really the time for me, and I can just start writing lots and lots and lots of words at a time at 11 o'clock as opposed to at noon when I get distracted by stuff. Either that's on social media or the press releases are coming or there's a news story and you got to take care of that. And you can't really focus on, the bigger story that you're trying to work on. So I would say like the 10 p.m. to like 1 a.m. range when I'm really, really, really working on a story that needs my complete undivided attention that I know is going to be an important story to write. That's when those thoughts start kicking in for me.
Now, when you went to ESPN, you were a blogger, which, and as I recall, you and I think Heather Dinich are posting like 5 to 7 times a day. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes it was 10 times a day, depending on what was happening. And in those instances, you can't work it. You can't do your best stuff at 1 a.m. Although there was a trick that we did with WordPress, which was what we used to post our blog posts. And I don't know what system you use to post your stuff, but on WordPress, which is what we used, you could future post, right? So I could write an entire post, and then I could schedule it to come out whenever I wanted, whatever day, whatever time I wanted. So there were a lot of times with Heather and I both being moms, and at that time our kids were really, really young, where we could get our blog posts for the next day set at 11 o'clock at night, let's say. So we didn't have to be up at 7 a.m. to start posting what was supposed to go up for 9 o'clock. And there was a set schedule. We had to have posts up during football season just about every hour, 9, 10, 11, 12 was lunchtime links. Then maybe we'd skip to 2, 3:30, and 5. So that was the schedule that we did for years and years across the blogs, not just us in the ACC, but the entire blog group that we had with the Power 5, and then also we had a Big East blog, which is what I started on. And those were some grueling days because it wasn't just writing that many blog posts. You're sitting there and you're doing as many interviews as possible so you can get all those blog posts put together. So trying to juggle the interview schedule plus the scheduling post schedule plus the writing plus the young children was extremely challenging. And, there were days where, you wondered, how am I going to get all this done today? And we always did. But football season, when we had those blogs, just became, this hashtag rise and grind that all these athletes use totally applied to us because that's what we would do every single day from August until December. And then when it was not football season, we were still posting about 5 posts a day. So
I guess your job now is more, you're able to do more in-depth stuff, I guess?
Yes, there's a lot more time to do more reporting, more in-depth stories. I mean, I hope folks have seen that with some of the stories David Hale has been able to do so far early on this football season. Well-reported, really good stories beyond just Clemson, but a lot of really good stories in the ACC. I've got a couple that are coming out here in the next few weeks, and I had some in the off season that I really had a chance to report out beyond just, okay, well, I got to do a blog post, and I'm just going to talk to this one linebacker, and that's going to be the blog post. Now you can do these well-rounded, well-reported stories that take you places that we could never really go to with a 500-word blog post. And, the more people you talk to, the more anecdotes you get, the better the stories are. And I think it all works out to being, much more comprehensive coverage, even if it's not 20 blog posts a day, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great, and really look forward to reading what you have coming up.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
Quick word about Uptown Realty LLC, headed up by Patrick Enzer, former sports writer who decided to get into the real estate game. Uptown Realty, locally owned and operated out of Sumter, but they serve the Eastern Midlands and PD area with the buying and selling of homes, commercial properties, and land. They also offer affordable new housing in the mid-130,000s from a local custom builder. Patrick is the sole owner and broker in charge. Grew up in Anderson, going to Clemson games, been in Sumter for 15 years, loyal Tiger Illustrated subscriber, loyal Dubcast listener. Website is uptownrealtysc.com. If you run a business that conducts credit card transactions with customers, you got to learn about Tandem Payment. Credit Card Processing Company has offices throughout the Southeast, but the one in Greenville in the upstate, headed up by a 2005 Clemson grad. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. Tandem has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and was awarded the Better Business Integrity Award in 2013. Check them out at tandempayment.com. All right, checking in from here in our home office in the bustling metropolis of Clemson, South Carolina, to another similar city, New York City. Ralph Russo, how you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, coming to you from Brooklyn, to be specific.
Gotcha. What a great.
After very much enjoying my brief time in Clemson, South Carolina this weekend.
Yeah, just curious to start off. You've been everywhere. You go to all the big games every weekend, and I'm just curious, and this wasn't your first time to Clemson, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are of Clemson as a home field environment, area, and all that in general, and what were your thoughts on, in particular, this past Saturday when A&M visited?
Oh, I would put it among the best spots in the country as far as, just game day atmosphere goes. The fans are really into it, and you have, I feel like any place that has a thing, right? And when I mean by a thing, like a tradition, with Howard's Rock and run down the field, run down the hill onto the field to open the game. That's just a special, unique moment in college football. So when you have one of those unique things, whether it's sort of the Grove in Oxford, whether it's Mike the Tiger at LSU in front of the visitors' locker room, so the players have to walk by him in his cage, things along those lines. I mean, so many schools have some great traditions, and when you have a unique tradition, it's one of those things where you tell people, you need to go here. Like, my friends do a college football trip, and most of them are sort of native Northeasterners who are scattered across the country, and they try to do a college football trip every year. And one of the places they're looking to go to is Clemson. And I tell them, like, listen, like, this is one of the, the top 10 places. You got to go there. You got to experience this unique atmosphere and the things that they do that make it special. And as far as Saturday, the funny thing is, it's so hot, and it's a day, and it's a day game.
Yeah.
So I do think the teams and the crowd had a hard time maintaining stamina, right? But nonetheless, the beginning again when they run. I hadn't been there in a while. I hadn't been to a Clemson game as good as Clemson has been. I hadn't been there in a little while, and but as hot as it was in the day game, the opening when they do Howard's Rock and run down the hill is still pretty electric. But I also could tell that everybody had a hard time sort of maintaining intensity on a day like when it's 94 degrees out.
Just curious, I hate to rewind all the way back to December, but you were a guest on the podcast then in Dallas as Clemson and Notre Dame were getting ready to play. I'm just curious what happened thereafter in the two games thereafter changed your view, I guess, or maybe changed the landscape of college football in general, just the way that Clemson sort of just took it to Notre Dame and Alabama.
Yeah, I think that there was the general feeling that you had two teams at the top of college football that had separated itself, right? I think we went in with that. I think the question was, do we have a clear 1 and 2, or do we have a 1 and 1A? And I think what we came out of last December and January realizing is that, no, now we have a 1 and 1A. Right, and you can put, again, it doesn't matter what order you put them in. We have sort of a tie for the top, and that Alabama and Clemson are on one level, and everybody else is on another level. It's not sort of Alabama, Clemson, and everybody else. It's Clemson and Alabama and everybody else. And I think that was the thing that became clear. I think I had kidded around that night of the championship game. Even before it even started, is the main trophy is obviously the championship trophy, but the other thing you're going to get out of this game is whoever wins. I'm talking about the championship game last January. Whoever wins here is going to be preseason number one. It's a small token, but my guess was that was going to happen, and that's exactly what happened. And I think that was what we established off of last January, is that Clemson can absolutely see eye to eye and be on the podium stand with Alabama. They're not just, sort of the best competition to Alabama. They are Alabama's equal.
So before this past Saturday's game, I was more optimistic about an entertaining game than you were. So I must give you full credit for calling that game better than I did. I thought the defense, that was the time to catch Clemson's defense as it reloads and rebuilds and all that. What was your sort of, I guess, specific take on the game or feeling on the game going in?
I guess that was one of those situations where I guess I was right, but not totally right, in that I expected Clemson to win rather comfortably, but probably for the wrong reasons. You had mentioned they're still sort of sorting things out on defense, and I thought, well, I don't think that's going to be much of a problem, because I think they'll get a big game from Lawrence. They'll get a big game from Etienne. David Hale from ESPN had the great stat he tweeted out early last week, which I'm sure a lot of Clemson fans already knew, but it really helped quantify things from on a national level. Last year against Texas A&M, Lawrence threw 8 or 9 passes. Etienne ran the ball 8 or 9 times, and Justin Ross played one play. So this is a very different Clemson team that was going to be, playing Texas A&M, and also in a very different atmosphere. So I expected the offense to be a lot better. Now, as it turns out, it was actually the defense that was outstanding. A&M, Kellen Mond is a little bit of a box of chocolates, right? I mean, you can never really know what you're going to get. Last year, he and his receivers played out of their minds in College Station. This year, they all sort of came back down to earth. But I mean, ultimately, again, that's why I say I was sort of right and wrong. I expected it to be a comfortable Clemson victory. I didn't expect them to really dominate defensively like they did, and that's what I ended up writing about on Sunday. Is just, listen, I don't know if any coordinator, any assistant football coach in college football is worth $2 million, but that's a bigger conversation. But if you're going to pay a guy $2 million, an assistant coach, a coordinator, Brent Venables is the guy to do it.
So I'm guessing you're not going to be covering Clemson for the rest of the regular season.
Well, the interesting thing is I wrote a little bit about that last night in sort of the framework of writing about the new poll that came out on Sunday, which obviously didn't have a whole bunch of surprises in it. The framework I've had it, and you can have this conversation in two different ways, is will Clemson stay number one all year, even if they keep winning? So the assumption is that, well, if you win, you stay number one. But the fact of the matter is, if they're sort of going about their business, beating teams that they're going to be favored by 14 to 20 points over, is there going to be a week where they don't play their best against an opponent that's clearly inferior? Maybe they only win by 7 or 8 points, maybe 10 points. Maybe Alabama or, let's just say Alabama or Georgia is in a really tough game against a highly ranked opponent. And does that push necessarily, one of those teams past Clemson? Now, and listen, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter if you're number 1 or you're number 2 in the AP poll. I mean, Clemson fans might take a certain amount of pride over being number 1. But if you take that let's just take that same conversation and take it out of the realm of the AP poll and sort of stick it in the playoff, right? If Clemson keeps winning, they're going to make the playoff. That's really a no-brainer. Is there this possibility that because they're playing teams again that they're going to be 14 to 20 point favorites over, if you have a misstep, is one misstep enough to sort of knock Clemson out of the playoff? There's a lot of other factors that go into that. How are teams doing all over the country? My sense is probably not. I think Clemson is so good they could conceivably get a mulligan if they were to, again, have a misstep and then go about beating everybody by 21 points. But I think that's sort of it's interesting that that's the framework of this season. The framework of this season for Clemson is not necessarily, is almost it's as if it's fait accompli, which is odd because, I mean, it's easy for me to say that, but I'm sure from a Clemson fan standpoint, you're still a fan of your team, which means that you're always nervous that things aren't going to go your way. But I know from a national standpoint, they're sort of looking at Clemson thinking like, well, they're just going to roll on here and we'll catch them. As you said, we'll catch you in the playoffs.
Were you able to, I guess let's take a detour, just sort of behind the scenes on how you do your job on this past particular weekend. So I finished my work and go home and watch the second half of the LSU Texas game. What do you? I mean, you're spending a good bit of time writing, and then I guess driving back to Atlanta. Is that right?
Yeah, this was a little bit of a tricky weekend. Now, the good thing is I wasn't writing live. I'll use a little journalism jargon there. I wasn't writing live off of the game. My colleague, Pete Iacobelli, who covers all things South Carolina sports, was covering the game, writing the regular game story. And what I was doing is doing some reporting again to take a story home with me, which ended up being published on Sunday on Brent Venables. And also, as you said, sort of keeping an eye on the whole country, because I also do a wrap-up column on Saturdays. And so I had to write some of that early and then come back. And as you said, I was driving back to Atlanta, but I found the LSU Texas game on the radio, and I managed to listen to that. And again, when that game was over, updated some things, tried to watch the late games as much as I could, or at least a taste of them before getting up for a 7:15 a.m. flight out of Atlanta. If I'm on the road, it gets a little complicated on a weekend between trying to keep up with games, keep up with everything. Do cover the game you're at, concentrate on what you're watching, but while still keeping an eye on the rest of the country. And then if I am on the road, the movement that comes with that becomes a little challenging too. Now, again, no complaints. I get to cover college football for a living and get to go to great places. So, but I must admit, the juggle of travel, game you're at, keeping an eye on the rest of the country, it's tricky. Let's just put it that way. It's a great job, but it's still tricky.
So the story you wrote Sunday about Venables and Clemson, when did you write that?
When I got home yesterday morning, because I was back in New York by 9 a.m. And ended up writing that and a couple of other things yesterday. Having done all the reporting already, post game. The great thing about, as anybody who's been around Clemson football knows, is they have a fair amount of accessibility after the games. They provide their coordinators and players, and their coordinators are chatty, right? So, yeah. So as opposed to some other teams, like if I that game ends, and I'm going like, okay, I know I'll write about the defense, I'll write about Venables. Like I know he's going to give me 8 to 10 minutes of not a one-on-one, but even in a group, he's going to give me 8 to 10 minutes of good stuff. He elaborates on answers. He gets detailed. Dabo obviously is not one who's short on words. The other coordinators and the players are all good talkers. So I was confident coming away from Clemson that I would get good material to work with.
Over the year we've been doing the Dubcast, we've developed a great relationship with the folks over at the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. In addition to being a great meeting spot for our interviews we conduct with local personalities, it's also a fantastic place to stay. The Abernathy is rolling out a loyalty savings program for 2019. After your third stay, you'll automatically be rewarded with an exclusive offer. It can be applied to future reservations for the remainder of the year. 15% off rooms, 15% off food and beverage at Taps Bar and Cafe. Learn more at theabernathy.com. So obviously Clemson fans and Alabama fans would be just fine to play in the next 4 or 5 national title games. But for the interest of the average college football fans, it'd be nice to have some other teams in the mix. I'm curious. I mean, obviously 2 weeks in, it's early to get a firm read, but as you look at LSU, as you look at Oklahoma with all the talent around Jalen Hurts, and then Georgia, which is just loaded right now, Ohio State with Justin Fields and plenty of talent around him, what's your feel? I guess LSU is the big story right now. Based on what you've seen and heard, what's your take on that offense right now and maybe the chances of them getting up into that mix?
I would put it this way. For the last 5 or 6 years, we have spent a lot of late October trying to talk ourselves into the idea that LSU and Alabama is a really interesting game, right? Yeah. And then we get to the game, and Alabama sits on LSU's chest for 60 minutes. And really, LSU hardly ever threatens Alabama. I mean, the last time LSU really threatened Alabama was, I think it's about 6 or 7 years ago. I think that probably changes now. Yeah, I do think that, when you see a dynamic quarterback, 3 receivers who are probably NFL players, all of a sudden, if nothing else, it becomes a different game. Right? Because I think even last year when Alabama had their own dynamic offense and was playing a very different style, you could tell that they walked into the LSU game going, you know what? We don't have to expose Tua. We don't have to go deep we don't have to do what we've been doing to other teams because we know we can just, as I said, sit on LSU's chest. They're not a threat to us, and we'll win this game 24-3 or something along those lines, 24-7. So not only does it produce a not particularly competitive game, but it also produces a really boring game, right? But if LSU is going to play the way that they have played the first couple of weeks, it will force Alabama to do what it has sort of recreated itself to do. So if nothing else, I don't know if LSU will beat Alabama. I don't think they will. I don't know if LSU and Alabama will play a particularly close game, but the style of game should be different. And if nothing else, that might make it more interesting.
I mean, there's no way that their offense now doesn't stress Bama more than the ground and pound of the last however many years. I mean, it's like playing right in their hands to just go pro style, right?
It is exactly that. I mean, it was literally, you pretty much nailed it. They had been pounding their heads against a brick wall, trying to beat Bama in a way that is, you just can't do it. I mean, there is no precedent for beating Alabama in this fashion. Oh, no, excuse me. There is. 2011 when they beat them 9-6, right? But honestly, football has changed since then. And Alabama has changed since then. And look at what Clemson does. And even when Auburn has beaten Alabama, it's because they have gotten themselves into higher scoring games and they've stressed their defenses in different ways. It brings up an interesting conversation. This is totally a tangent. But I had this sort of DM conversation with somebody who I won't tell you who it was, but on Twitter, who said, I do wonder if Georgia at some point is going to regret picking Fromm over Fields, because Fields might be a guy who can beat Alabama, as good as Fromm is, as Fromm is. And who knows, Georgia has been so close. I assume at some point they're going to get Alabama. It may be this year, it may be next year. At some point, Georgia is going to get Alabama. They're just moving in that direction. But it was just an interesting spin on things of the idea that, like, you know, there's something about, you know, the way Fields plays with a running element and that big arm and being able to do a lot of different things as opposed to the way Georgia plays, which is sort of, you know, a little more old school, and the guy's going to sit in the pocket and they're going to, you know, hand the ball to the tailback. You know, again, way ahead in a bit of a tangent, but I do wonder long term if we will get to see a matchup here where all of a sudden, you know, Georgia fans will go, oh, that's what's so special about Justin Fields. And as much as we love Jake Fromm, you know, maybe we had something that was a little different. Maybe. I think that's an interesting thing that could play out as the season goes on.
Well, and if Fromm goes pro after this year early, they got nobody, so they're going to be hitting the transfer portal pretty hard, you would think, if Fromm goes pro. But the interesting thing about Georgia is their offensive line is so big and so good,
amazing,
and so talented.
Amazing.
They can do that to Alabama. I mean, they were doing it last year with pounding DeAndre Swift and just obviously let the game slip away. But that's one team that sort of seems constructed to play Alabama's game, to play into their hands, so to speak, and still have a shot to win just because they're so filthy talented on the line and everywhere else.
I also have a tendency to feel like Georgia, there's a certain creativity baked into the old schooliness of their offense that they, even with Jim Chaney, who, you know, is having a hard time over at Tennessee, they did something. They do a lot of pre-snap motion stuff that creates some matchups where, you know, listen, it's not spread. You're not running the quarterback, so you don't have that element of that element in your offense. But I sense that there's a little bit of creativity there with some of the things that you were doing with Swift before he was the main back and with Sony Michel. But yeah, nonetheless, though, it will be interesting to see how this thing plays out over the season because you mentioned Ohio State. Boy, Fields, you know, it's only a couple of games against not, you know, Power 5 teams, but this kid was 1-1A. You talk about 1-1A with Trevor Lawrence coming out of high school. And we have seen a glimpse of what could be a really special player, you know, a really season-changing player. And if he is on the path to being that, Ohio State becomes a completely different animal too, and to work them back into the mix and see where they go come playoff time could be really interesting too. If he is that type of player, if the glimpse of what we've seen out of Justin Fields is the real Justin Fields.
Ralph, as I look at the top 6 teams, Clemson, Bama, Georgia, LSU, Oklahoma, Ohio State, when I watch these teams, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this guy. Oh my God, look at the talent here, there, all over the place, just loaded. And then after that, I look at the teams 7 and let's say 7 to 12, or 7 to 13, whatever, and I'm kind of like, in your opinion, how big is the gap between that first tier and then the next tier?
It does seem very big right now, and there's nothing that's happened in the first couple of weeks that has changed my mind on that. Now, listen, Texas played LSU pretty well, and I think they're getting there. I do. I still think, you know, they are in a situation with Tom Herman's team where their best players are in their newest classes. So you have a bunch of D-backs who are all 4- and 5-star players, but are in have all started maybe 10 or 11 games. So you end up with what you have against LSU on Saturday. But no, I think generally speaking, you're right. And you said 7 through 12 or 13. I would even say 7 through 20. I think that there's a pretty big drop off, and that there's interesting parity within that second and third tier, or if you want to maybe say Clemson and Alabama are one tier, everybody, the next group is another tier. So let's say they're the third and fourth tier. I think that there's a lot of parity, so to speak, within that. But you're right. It's just, at this point, it really does seem like we're 2 weeks into the season, and we've sort of figured out, okay, there's about 6 teams here, and that should be where the playoff teams come from. I hope that's not the case. It'd be interesting to see somebody else sort of rise up there. But I think even if somebody were to sneak into the playoff, let's say Utah. Let's just take them. Let's say things break in a certain way and the SEC teams kind of pick each other off, and where Utah sneaks in there. It might be neat to have them there. It might be neat to sort of get the West Coast, the western part of the country involved. but I can't see them winning any games. I think they're still, them and a lot of other teams are still a big cut behind the teams that you just mentioned.
Ralph Russo, national college football writer for the AP. Really appreciate you joining us. I know you have a really busy schedule, but always fun talking to you, man. Great seeing you this past weekend as well.
Thank you very much, Larry. Anytime.
All right. Thanks so much to Ralph Russo and Andrea Adelson for joining us on this Monday to talk about their reflections on Clemson and a bunch of other stuff. Thanks to all of our sponsors for their very generous support, including our title sponsor, Parham Smith & Archin Hull Law Firm. And, of course, thanks to all y'all for making this a part of your routine. Really appreciate it. We'll be back again for the second time later this week. Y'all have a good one. Cheers.